We are going to get underway because we have an action-packed program between now and lunch. I do apologize for the shortness of the coffee break, but you will have lots more time for networking and building that Learning Lab community over the lunch break later on and in the sessions this afternoon. So as I said before the break, we are going to delve deeper into the importance of education policy impact evaluation, look at its implications for policy design, look at those capacity building issues, look at issues relating to the link between evaluation and policy. And for this one, I am delighted to introduce your moderators, Silke Schnepf and Josep Amer-Mestre, who both work in the Competence Centre on Microeconomic Evaluation, CCME, at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, and they are working, the aim of that centre is to foster impact evaluation in Europe, and they are both part of the Learning Lab team. I will let you introduce your wonderful speaker. Over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much. Welcome to the session. So our speaker, we are thrilled to have Nuno Crato with us, who is a university professor at the University of Lisbon. He is also the president of the Iniciativa Education, exactly, in Portugal. Thank you very much. And he's a researcher, he's an economist, he's an applied mathematician, he's a writer. He has written numerous journal articles in highly ranked journals. He has written a book on data-driven impact evaluation. So he has a fantastic career as a researcher. In addition, he has a fantastic experience in policy making, because from 2011 to 2015, he was Minister of Education, Higher Education and Science in Portugal. So what Nuno combines here are these two different kind of languages we were talking about in the previous session. The language of the researcher and the language of the policymaker. And as such, Nuno, we are very happy now to listen to your talk about opportunities of that impact evaluation in education can bring us and their importance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'll speak from here because I can better organize my time, because time is scarce. Well, thank you very much, Silke. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks everybody for being here. It's a great pleasure to be in the launching of this lab, because this is a fantastic initiative and this is something that has to be supported and has to be developed. We need actually, and everybody here is convinced about it, I believe, but not everybody outside, evidence-informed policies. And we also need policy impact evaluation. And two things are slightly different from my perspective. If I just turn this glass around, the water will fall. Do you doubt it? Do you doubt it? No. If I become crazy and I take that micro and I start speaking from there, maybe you, Joseph, would think I'm a great speaker and a great animator, and maybe Silke, you would confirm your thoughts that I'm completely crazy. So we don't know, when we are talking about humans being humans, and we are talking about kids and schools, exactly how things we are doing will work. We should be informed about what we know, but we should always evaluate the programs we are doing. For instance, at Iniciativa Educação, which is Educação, it's a very difficult word to pronounce, but education initiative, if you want. In Portugal, we implemented two programs, one in professional, in VAT, and the other in reading. And we are based on lots of research about reading interventions. But we are still evaluating what we are doing. Because one thing is try to apply the best methods, to apply the best evidence, to be informed by the evidence, and the other thing is to succeed. So our next step is to apply what we know, but always confirming it's working in those circumstances. Because in education, we have different circumstances, and we have different people, and we are not exactly every time doing the same thing, like with the water, that I guarantee you, and you trust me, it would fall. What I think is that Evidence should inform our goals, evidence should inform our policies, but we should also use experience, namely teachers' experience, and we should use rationality, data, and general sciences. Well, rationality is very important here. I don't know if any of you has read Rousseau. If you read Rousseau, you don't need experience. It doesn't work. It's not rational. From our experience, we know what that philosopher proposed is wrong. It doesn't apply. It doesn't work. So you don't need any data-based. And in many ways, teachers know a couple of things, and we should listen to them. We should listen to their experience. So experience, rationality, science, evaluation, they are all components of the same thing, the same goal. For instance, but we are now changing in lots of ways. We have what I believe it's a scientific revolution in education. And this scientific evolution has a couple of components. And the first one is data. Because now we have data as we never had before. And this started in the last 25, 30 years. The first TIMSS was in 1995. Of course, we had the first study, which was not called TIMSS, and we had many studies before, and the United States has a couple of evaluations that have been gone for a long time. But data, with this regularity, as TIMSS has every 4 years, or as PISA has every 3 years starting in 2000, this never happened before in human civilization. So we have data as never before. This is a scientific revolution, or this allows us to take the experience and understanding how things work. No one, or almost no one, in the 1990s would believe that Europe and the United States were not ahead in education. Then TIMSS came, then PISA came, and then we looked at Asia, and we saw Singapore, and we saw South Korea, and we saw that in Europe and in the United States, in Canada, there is still a large fraction of what we call low performers, or what PISA and TIMSS call low performers. And that fraction, of course, was, from various estimates, around 60% in the world. And we think, well, 60% in the world, probably Africa, of course, has lots of problems, probably South America, but maybe we didn't think that in the US and in Europe, it's around 20%. So 20% of kids in Europe and in the United States have still lots of trouble reading and performing basic computations. So education needs to take these things into account. And when we started having data to compare countries, we understood there are many things that need to be done. One of the things that we understood is that money matters, but it's not all. And money investment in education is correlated to results in education up to a limit. And of course, it's correlated for countries that have a low investment and have a very low performance. Chile, well, Chile is one of the best in South America, but South America countries, African countries, and so on. But once we move to countries that are like Portugal, like Sweden, countries after a certain threshold, we see that money is not correlated with education outcomes. And there is a fantastic graph by PISA 2015 showing exactly that. And so we should be careful with this. Estonia invests about 1/2 of the money in education than Austria does. It has better results than Austria. Poland invests about 1/3 of the money that Luxembourg does, has better results than Luxembourg. So this leads us to understand that money is not everything. This is something that we get from data now that we couldn't get before. Direct instruction is better than discovery learning. Who would guess that? Just go to PISA report 2015. See the graphs there. Direct instruction by teachers works better than discovery learning. Well, and we have lots of other evidence. Of course, no evidence is definite, is forever. And we have to always question the evidence and think what we mean by this and be very careful with the particulars. But the studies the data from PISA and from teams is very large, and many, many different types of studies can be done based on that. For instance, student assessment is good. That's something we learn from PISA data. And I should not talk about only about international data, but also about administrative data. It's also a revolution in administrative data. We couldn't have data about students' backgrounds, how do students react to certain types of things, students' grades, students' evolution. We couldn't have this data if we didn't have administrative data that now is digitalized, and in many countries it works very well. So we have data. Second thing, we have instruments to deal with data that we didn't have 50 years ago, say, for the counterfactual methods. So we know how to use counterfactual methods. Most politicians have no idea what counterfactual means. They have no idea. And I'm not saying bad things about politicians. I'm not a politician. I was an occasional politician. But I'm saying that just go to the streets, ask, what is a counterfactual? What could we, and people would say, no, this doesn't work. It's too complex, too many variables, too many things. How can you isolate in the midst of so many variables that have to do with intelligence, that have to do with social upbringing, and so on? How can you isolate the impact of particular things, such as testing? But we know we can, because we have developed a couple of methods. I mean, not I, but we have developed a couple of methods for that. And then, so these methods allow us to discuss things like class size. Class size, everybody would say, oh no, the smaller the better. Oh, if we have 22 and reduce to 21, it's better. It's not. It's not. We know that from data. And we know also it's not significant. At this size, it's not significant. Of course, if you have 70 students in a class and reduce to 30, that's very good. But if you have 20 and reduce to 21 and reduce to 20 or something like that, it's not, it doesn't work. And we also know from data that there are many other policies that have much more impact on education, such as curriculum, such as assessment, such as tutoring. We know that. Then we have a third component that I'd say it's cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is something that didn't exist up to the last quarter of the 20th century. Not even the name. The name didn't exist. So cognitive psychology and all the results that we now have from cognitive psychology, a model that we have of the mind, didn't exist before. So we had the behaviorists. They would just believe that it was impossible to penetrate human mind. And now we know, we have a theory in the same sense that we have the theory of relativity. So a testable and theory that has been corroborated by many, many experiments about the architecture of the brain. We know there is an attention. We know there is a working memory. We know that then there is a long-term memory. We know that what goes to long-term memory goes through the working memory. We know working memory is limited, and so we have to be careful about the cognitive load that we introduce to students. So that explains why books for kids to learn how to read with lots of whistles and whistles, how do you say, whistles and well, with lots of pictures don't work as well as books that are very modest about pictures and concentrate on decoding. We know that from cognitive psychology, and we know that from many, many experiences. We also know that long-term memory is very important to address things and to learn new things. One of the most important things we know from psychology is that the ability to learn a new thing depends primarily about what we already know that is related to this new thing. And this means that the more we know, the more we are able to know more. And this means that knowledge is important. So when people are talking about skills are important because we live in 21st century, and nowadays it's not important just to know stuff because it's on the internet, we should say that's not true. That's not true. Because we can't interpret what's in the internet. We can't even ask the proper questions if we don't have knowledge to consubstantiate it. So the brain is no longer a black box. And going back to testing, am I on the brain? I have 1 minute. Okay. Okay. So testing. Testing. This is a fantastic example of triangulation. Because from analysis of PISA, economics of education has shown from PISA and TIMSS and all this data that when a country introduces standardized testing, that country improves. When a country eliminates standardized testing, that country goes back in terms of education. It goes back in what matters for impact assessment, and what matters is learners. Learners, knowledge, and skills. That's what matters. And this is a triangulation we have here, because we know that from studies. Then we know from cognitive psychology the same thing, that testing is very important, because testing is something, testing yourself is the most efficient way to learn. It's much better to go and solve problems in the back of the book, to be asked questions, to answer tests, than simply to reread the book. So we know that from cognitive psychology. We now know from other education studies that when we have a standardized testing from one country, then that translates into better and more aligned formative testing in schools, and that's the way to learn. So we know lots of things. And the fourth component, I would say, is neurosciences. But
don't have time for that.
We don't have time for that. And also, I have to say that neurosciences are starting to show us many things, have many promises, but from the moment there are many things that are being said that need to be really tested again. We need to learn more. We know things, fantastic things, for instance. We know that when we add, there is a part of the brain that is activated. When we subtract, there is a different part of the brain. How do we translate this into the classroom? I have no idea. And I believe that it's very difficult to have ideas. But we know other things, for instance, we know that the brain is more activated, it's more concentrated. In general, this is all statistics, it's all testing, when a lecturer is talking than when a video is shown in classroom. And this has been
I know they've got some questions for you, so I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up so they can... I'm sorry.
You are perfectly right.
Thank you, Nuno. I have a first question for you, and I want to touch on the science revolution, or the revolution of science that you mentioned. And you have highlighted the relevance that counterfactual impact evaluation of education policies matters for this revolution. And as we know, the Learning Lab aim is to use these methods to inform policy. So my first question would be, what importance do you think can counterfactual impact evaluation for education policies play in the future? How do you see the future of that?
I hope it will be a great role. I hope. And we need really it. But we have to understand that we are not living in a laboratory. And when we are doing impact assessment, we translate it into policy actions. The policymakers are pressed to different interests, to special interests, to many things. And of course, they may, and sometimes they have no alternative, than not following exactly what policy impact evaluation and what previous studies say, but follow slightly different things. But they need to know, and people need to know. And I agree completely with one, I think it was Raphael, who said, well, we have to translate this in terms of voters. It's very important that people at large understand that we now know a couple of things about education, and politicians should have that in mind, and we can help them. And it's fantastic that experts such as you can advise policymakers. That's fantastic. But Well, but it's not easy.
Okay, thank you very much, Nuno, for that and for the inspiring talk. So being a part of the Learning Lab team, I do know an advertisement question, and I hope that you allow me that, okay? So the Learning Lab has a number of activities to foster impact evaluation in the European Union. And one part is, for example, the community of practice, which we heard this morning already, where the whole point is to get people together, to learn together, to exchange experience and so on. Another activity is to build capacity across member states who are interested. We are going to member states and teach there. And the third activity is in collaboration with member states. The Learning Lab is conducting impact evaluations, trying to help overcome data problems, so all these kinds of technical support that is there. So, so the question is for you, how much do you think these kind of activities can contribute to get more information on what kind of policies work in the field of education?
I think it's very valuable, but be prepared. It's a bumpy ride. It's not a smooth ride that now we know this and then policy will be that and then everything will be perfect. It's not. It's a bumpy ride. And it's important for you and I, it's important for us to understand that policy is not directly commanded by the evidence or by science. Policy has to take into consideration many things. But it's very important that you spread the word. Because many people, you go to a discussion in a country, and people say, how much do we invest in education? Well, if you could do this in Luxembourg or in Sweden, what's the purpose of this discussion? We should ask instead, how do we invest in education? Because that's the important part. And the public should understand that. And this is a message that should be spread, and this comes from the impact. Then a second thing is to help governments to see what they are doing. But as someone in the previous panel said, I don't remember who was, we have this tendency to go from innovation to innovation until remaining in the same place. Oh, Tommaso, come si dice? Bisogna tutto cambiare perché tutto rimanga.
Everything must change so everything stays the same.
Exactly. So, as the Lampedusa said that. So, some people think that we innovate without evaluation. So, the built-in evaluation is very important because that also would make people cautious about the innovation, about what they are doing. And we know that a couple of things don't work. And we know that some things work better than others. For instance, we know from lots of experiments that tutoring has a much larger size effect if it's directed to the built-up knowledge and skills of students than when it's built just directly to the social, emotional being, which is good, it's good. But we know that it works, the impact is much higher if it goes for learning how to read than to convince students that to read is necessary. Sure.
Thank you. Now I want to talk to you about a little bit of data. So as Silke said, one of the tasks of the Competence Center on Microeconomic Evaluation is to perform impact evaluations. And for that, administrative data is of the essence. And even the linkage of data across institutions. Without that, probably some of the policies, some of the evaluations that we have done wouldn't have been possible. So I want to ask you, could you give us a sense of how relevant it is to have access to high-quality data, administrative data, for impact policy evaluation? And also, could you touch a little bit on what are the strategies that we should have to make the data holders, to make them understand that this data should be available for research and for impact evaluation?
Thank you for the question. I think that one of the ways is to have more meetings like these, to explain, to spread the word, to tell people, well, look, there is impact. Show examples, show cases. why don't you go to your Commissioner of Education and say, we want to make a showcase, a big conference of showcase of impact evaluation in Europe, things like that. And this will change the mentalities little by little, I hope. I'm not so very optimistic, but I hope it will change mentalities little by little. But we know we need not only administrative data, we know something that possibly you can call it administrative data, is data about students learning. Because that's the purpose. We are not here to make teachers happy or to make parents happy or, well, we are too. We don't want them to be not happy. That's not what I'm saying. Don't take me wrong. But our main purpose is that learners know more and can act better. So knowledge and skills, we have to measure that. How do you measure that if we don't have national assessment? How do you measure? You don't measure. We have to wait 4 years for next PISA, this time 5 years. Or we have to wait 4 years for next team. So we don't measure. So we also need to tell everybody that every country needs to have standardized testing, and this standardized testing has to be consistent, has to be valid, has to always measure the same things or measure similar things, so to be comparable, because that's the way to assess the impact of our actions.
Thank you, Nuno. And indeed, I think in the COVID session we will see that exactly these countries who did this, for those countries we can say something about the impact of COVID on learning outcomes, right? Yeah. And that was very important because there's no cross-national survey available in times like the pandemics, right? I just wanted to go back to something that you said when I asked you about the evaluation or our activities, right? You said, yeah, but be aware, it might not be on the agenda of the policymaker at the moment, what you produced, Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how is it possible, or how can we make policy makers aware and willing to use the results of high quality impact evaluations?
I think it's something similar to what Rafael suggested. So you have to spread the word. You have to tell everybody this. You have to organize conferences. You have to show things. And you have to convince people little by little. You have to help convince people little by little that there are a couple of things that we know that work and a couple of things we know don't work and a couple of things that may work if we do the right way. And so inform the public, inform the stakeholders. And then that's the indirect way to arrive at ministers. Because you understand, a minister of education many times is the previous minister of agriculture. And and arrives at the ministry. I actually wrote a funny text about this, if you want. It's open access. It's a letter to a young minister. It's a collection of letters from previous ministers to a young minister, collected by Fernando Rimers. And it's exactly this. So it arrives there, has no idea. So we have immediately to put on the agenda that you are starting this job, you come with best intention, that's good. Let me inform you that there are a couple of things that work and a couple that don't work.
We need to wrap up now.
Yep, that was great. Thank you very much. That's all I have. I mean, and I'm sure we will touch some of the things you mentioned. We will touch in next sessions. I'm sure about that. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Silke, Josep, for a fascinating session. We could listen to you for hours, Professor, but sadly we are out of time. But that was a wonderful session. Thank you.